Our first speaker, I'm really pleased to introduce, is Gunda Schumann. She is a lesbian activist of Laz Reloaded EV, member of the board, lawyer, and sociologist. And Gunda's talk is the aftermath of SBGG, self-ID law in Germany. Welcome, Gunda. And as always, I'm really excited to listen to your talk, and over to you.
Thanks a lot. Bernadette, first slide, please. Dear all, today I want to talk about the German Self-Determination Act and its consequences 1 year after it entered into force, especially the impact on lesbians, women, and girls. Next slide, please. Here you see the core elements of SBGG, the Self-ID Act in Germany. The first and basic one is self-declaration on sex entry by persons aged 14 or older at the registry office, with the possibility of annual change of sex entry. Minors aged 14 and over do not require counseling, but do require parental consent. In cases of conflict, the family court decides. The next principle is prohibition of disclosure punishable by a fine up to 10,000 euro. There are also some exceptions. In cases of reproductive health, health-related measures, and in cases of tension or defense, biological sex is decisive. Later, I am talking later about this. Next slide, please. Advantages and disadvantages of self-declaration and the prohibition of disclosure. Advantages for the persons affected. Unbureaucratic procedure for persons with, quote unquote, different gender identity aged 18 and over. The prohibition of disclosure is intended to protect against bullying. Disadvantages. The evidential function of sex entry is eliminated, thus enabling abuse. Access to legal positions reserved for women, which serve to compensate for disadvantages suffered in professional life, for example, claiming the women's quota in professional positions, and access by biological male persons to protected and autonomous lesbian women's spaces are legally legitimized. State support for social transition without any mandatory counseling promotes medical transition, which minors often later regret. Early transition reinforces traditional sex role stereotypes. Parental rights are severely restricted by the involvement of the family court in cases of conflict. The prohibition of disclosure, which is punishable by a fine, curtails freedom of expression and freedom of the press, and through draconian deterrence, fines of up to 10,000 euro, constitutes an attack on our democracy. Next slide, please. Are there provisions in law to counteract possible abuse? First, the relationship between the state and persons with different gender identity. The prohibition on disclosure does apply to law enforcement and security authorities. However, this does not include corresponding information for certain security and other authorities, meaning that loopholes for criminals remain. However, please note, Our Federal Minister of the Interior, Dobrindt, wants to close this loophole with a regulation. More about that later. In the event of a state of emergency or defense being declared, the change of sex entry made up to 2 months earlier is irrelevant. That means female-identified men are conscripted. Next slide, please. In relationships between private individuals, the House rules freedom of contract and statutory autonomy of legal entities apply to access to facilities and rooms, as well as participation in events. Are these civil law provisions adequate to balance the rights of women, lesbian girls on the one hand and minority rights on the other? Civil law provisions are not sufficient to protect the sex-based rights of women, lesbians, and girls, which arise from the principle of equal rights of our basic law, that is the German Constitution. According to the General Equal Treatment Act, it's here abbreviated AGG, discrimination on the basis of sex without objective reason is unlawful. A change in sex registration from male to female is not in itself a criterion for exclusion from access to women's, lesbians, girls, rooms, or events. However, it is questionable whether legal gender or biological sex is relevant here, and whether it therefore depends on discrimination or house rules. Legal recourse remains open. Please note, current legal dispute, Laura H. versus Doris Lange, owner of the Women's Gym in Erlangen. I talk about that later. According to SBGG, the admission of transgender persons to women's sports is left to the sports associations themselves. In sports competitions, therefore, the existence of women's sports is threatened. Please note, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee has excluded transgender persons from participating in women's sports. Slide 6, please. Abolition of quota regulations for women in public service. The inclusion of persons with different gender identities in the quota system for women. That means equal opportunity officers, deputies, women's representatives, under the Federal Equal Opportunities Act and the correspondent state quota laws, is not compatible with the constitutionally guaranteed rights of women. There's case law. Next slide, please. Now the solution. Next slide, please. What would legislators need to do to strike a fair balance between minority rights, persons with different gender identities, and women's, lesbians, girls' rights? It is necessary and required by the state to strike an appropriate balance between the fundamental rights of women and girls of our Constitution on the one hand, and the fundamental rights of persons with a different gender identity or dual gender identity, that means intersexuality, on the other hand. This measure follows from the rule of law and democracy, which obliges the legislator, that means the German Bundestag, to make the necessary regulations itself and not to shift them to other powers, like the judiciary. The validity of sex entry should be reintroduced by law through constitutionally compliant expert opinion practice. In addition, regulations for women, lesbians, girls are necessary to guarantee autonomous and safe spaces, professional advancement, and social participation like sports. Next slide, please. What has happened in the years since SBGG entered into force? Now it gets exciting. Federal government. There's a draft regulation by the CSU-led Federal Ministry of the Interior on the transfer of data relating to changes of first name and sex entry to other authorities. It's called Regulation Implementing the Act on Self-Determination with regard to sex entry in the registration system. The measures are creation of 3 additional register sheets. The purpose is traceability of a person's identity after changing their personal data in the registry office register for other authorities. For example, pension insurance and Federal Central Tax Office. The reason is SBGG contains a regulatory gap in the provision on prohibition of disclosure based on the decision of the Parliamentary Family Committee of April 10th, 2024. The Greens say this is a special register for trans persons. The draft has been put to the second chamber for decision, so it's not a valid executive order right now. Next point. In the coalition agreement, the government says the SBGG is going to be evaluated by June 2026. To date, no criteria have been developed by the Federal Ministry of Education, Family, Seniors, Women and Youth for this purpose, or they are under lock and key. Now the Federal Parliament, the Bundestag. The case of Mala Svenja Liebig, alias Sven Liebig, the fugitive transgendered neo-Nazi. Is it a structural problem? That says, they say the Christian Democrats. Or is it an isolated case, like the Social Democrats say? More likely the latest isolated case in a series of similar cases. There's a parliamentary debate regarding SBGG dated September 11th on the AfD's motion. The AfD is a right-wing party in Germany. The AfD had filed a motion, repeal the law on self-determination with regard to sex entry, restore legal clarity and protection for vulnerable groups such as women and young people. The data this right-wing party has published registration so far of 2,600 applicants in Berlin within 6 months. That is 2/3 of all application in Germany at the registry offices for change of sex entry so far. Next point, there's a parliamentary debate on the draft bill by Alliance 90, the Greens, to amend our constitution with insertion of the characteristic of so-called sexual identity, thereby conflating sex and gender. The Christian Democratic Union representatives remain silent on women's rights in that debate. Slide 10, please. Now to the case law. Lawsuit filed by Laura H. against Doris Lange. In the slide, it's the other way around, doesn't matter. Doris Lange is an owner of an exclusive women's fitness studio in Erlangen. From May 2025 for discriminatory denial of access on the basis of sex gender identity under the General Equal Treatment Act, which could trigger a claim for contract conclusion or compensation. Here the issue is privileging of a certain group of people, that means women, and objectively justified discrimination against biological men under the AGG due to the need for protection or intimacy of biological women as a criterion for admissibility. The defendant has rejected a settlement proposal by the plaintiff. No date has yet been set for the oral hearing. The other case, application for a preliminary injunction by Maler Svenja Liebig versus Julian Reichelt. That's a right-wing publishing house, for violation of the prohibition of disclosure, which is based on the personal rights of a transgender person. The Berlin Regional Court dismissed the application in August of this year on the grounds that the violation of personal rights in the case is covered by freedom of expression as a higher ranking right. The ratio is even uncomfortable opinions, that means to tell the truth, that are rejected by parts of society or perceived as hurtful are permissible as long as the statement in question is true. That means the claimant is a biological man. Now to civil society. What happens in sports? The federal government does not see any impact of the SBGG on participation in sports competitions, as sports associations are free to regulate their own affairs due to their autonomy under their statutes. However, the German Football Association, DFB, refers to the SBGG in its intention to liberalize playing rights for transgender and intersex persons. Internationally, however, the development goes into the other direction. The newly elected IOC president, Kirsty Coventry, has spoken out in favor of stricter restrictions in the women's category. In the United States, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee has banned men who identify as trans women from participating in women's sports in July 2025, following President Trump's executive order keeping men out of women's sports. This rule will apply to the 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. 25 US states have already taken similar measures. International sports federations, swimming, athletics, cycling, boxing have already excluded trans women. Soccer is currently reviewing new limits. Women's missed medal opportunities due to inclusion policies have been compiled here. In Great Britain, as a result of the Supreme Court ruling in April 2025, most sports associations have banned trans people from participating in women's sports. That means many, many countries have taken another path for past experiences. However, Germany has started very late with all this gender crap. And now we are really in the middle of a debate, and the newly elected German government, which is a coalition between Social Democrats and Christian Democrats, is very hard working, mostly in the background, at least to revise some of the consequences. However, it's a very long path, and in the moment, even the judiciary is very, very not very forthgoing to change the direction, but they are still thinking back and forth, and the result in the long run is not clear yet. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gunda. That's very, very interesting and shocking to hear, to find out what's happening in Germany. Just to understand more fully, the attempt now to change the German constitution, is that ongoing and it might change in the next year or so?
To change the constitution, you need a majority of 2/3 in the federal parliament. That means without the Christian Democrats, there's no way. As for now, it seems that the Christian Democrats are not willing to give in. However, we have 16 states, and there are 3 states led by Christian Democrats in a coalition with Greens, or Social Democrats, who have submitted a draft law to the federal parliament through the second chamber, our Bundesrat, which is the union of the states. Anyway, the Bundestag, as far as my information is concerned, is not willing to give a vote on that. So now the draft is resting within the relevant committees on law and interior and family.
Could you explain where the parties are on this? So, I think you said that the CDU, the Christian Democrats,
I can explain
go on,
very
tell us.
easily. Yeah. We had the former so-called traffic light government. These were the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberal Democrats. This government broke up late last year, and we had a new federal elections early this year. Now the coalition government is consisting of the 2 Christian Democratic parties and the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats have also been part of the last government. Therefore, it is very difficult to find a common path between the Christian Democratic Union and the Social Democrats in this respect. I think the debate is going on behind the scenes, not in the public.
And how about the
I have lobby
parties?
contacts. I have lobby contacts to the Christian Democratic Union, to some people there, and they confirm to me that this constitution will not be changed and that they will change the SBGG. However, it is undercover, it's behind the scenes, and it's very difficult to find out any details about the critical item.
Great. But so when you say they will change the SBGG, they will try to roll back to reverse the self-ID.
At least to change some stuff. I think not to kill this law. That I don't think so. But to, for example, this change of sex entry every year, that will definitely be changed. And also the impact on youth. on minor persons, which is incredible, you know.
Yeah.
They
And
even don't need counseling. You know, minors, 10 years olds, they don't need counseling. No, they know
but
everything about themselves.
how about public opinion? I mean, are the newspapers picking up on this and discussing the damage
Yes,
done?
yes,
What?
there are
Yeah.
papers picking up on it,
Yeah.
but a minority. The majority is mainstream, gender mainstream.
Yeah. And what about the extreme, the ADF, is it, and the links
Yeah,
parties?
the AfD
Mm,
is the only party in the federal parliament that is constantly, we say in German, putting the finger in the wound
mm,
and always picking on that issue and asking questions, formalized questions, you know, a couple of hundred questions, and the government is obliged to answer to them, for example.
yeah.
Or they start a debate, or they submit a draft law, you know, and then they start a parliamentary debate, very formalized parliamentary debate. And then
And the left, the links, they're
it's
just
nightmarish,
pro-trans,
nightmarish.
pro-trans. Yeah.
Left are pro-trans,
Greens.
the Greens are the really, they are the worst, you know,
Yeah.
because they have initiated this whole thing.
Yeah. And how
Um,
about
and the
like
Social Democrats as well, you know, but they are one of the followers.
yeah. How about the feminist, the famous Emma magazine with Alice Schwarzer? They
Yeah.
were being slightly gender critical. Where are they at the
Yes,
moment?
they are gender critical. Yes, they are. Yes.
And is the magazine Emma going to carry on forever? It seems to me as if it's been going for like 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, they do. For example, recently we had a demonstration against so-called trans medical practice. And Emma had a big article about it. Also, some German newspapers had large articles about it. But still, it's a minority, you know.
yeah,
At the same time, there are attacks in the social media against doctors who are critical about this tendency to operate minors, you know, to change their bodies. Um, and the mainstream doctors, they don't even raise their voice against
yeah,
these attacks,
yeah.
you
So
know?
I keep having more questions. What I've heard that it's the worst place to speak out, that there are threats of fines of 100,000 euros if you misgender someone, or
No, not
how's that?
100,000. No,
But
no, not so much. No, no.
have people been fined for misgendering?
Not that I know of.
That's good.
These cases which I mentioned are the most prominent cases at the moment.
Yeah,
No? But the effect of this law is uh, to push people down and not to let them talk, you know, to limit, to suppress their freedom of speech. You know, that is the problem.
yeah. And what about in Britain? You know, we've had lots of organizations springing up like WDI and Sex Matters and Women's Rights Network and Let Women Speak and all sorts of other small groups or larger groups, Filia, who are resisting in a range of different ways. How about in Germany? Have you had a sort of uprising of the women's movement around this issue?
Yeah, for example, we have Frauenheldinnen. I'm sure you have heard about them. It's translated women's heroes. For example, we have a big conference now in 2 weeks on not just, but also on this issue. Also on political Islam is one of the topics, which is also a problem in Germany. But the SBGG is the other big problem which is being discussed there.
Yeah.
There are a couple of hundred women will appear.
Yeah.
So yes, there are lots of groups, but they are not well coordinated, let's say. You know, they are not, there's not a sort of umbrella or so. They are doing their own activities, and there is also some solidarity. Sometimes not. It depends, you know.
Yeah.
But one thing is this conference in 2 weeks nearby Bonn in West Germany, where many women will attend, and I think network and talk and so on. I will be there as well.
Yeah. And then just finally, the last question about your organization that you've been in for a long time, Las Reloaded. Could you tell us, are you doing fine? Is the organization coming up? Are you going to have any actions or publications or in the next year or so?
Yeah, we have a very active website, and we are participating in activities of other organizations, and we just had our 50th anniversary. We had a big event in Berlin with contemporary witnesses and many women, many interested lesbians even from abroad. We had from Netherlands, from Denmark, from United Kingdom women, and we did a boat trip. So that was to get women together and to talk and to resume what happened in the last 50 years.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. That's really good.
But
Yeah, go on.
one sentence.
Yeah.
We have problems to recruit younger persons, younger lesbians. That's a big problem for us. So I will not say that we are in a very good state, but we try to do our best.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the work you do, and hopefully that might be a next step. There's certainly developments in that regard in Britain, that there are many more young lesbian organisations and young women coming into the sex realist movement or gender abolitionist movement. So that is happening, but it's slow. It's slow. But